A father and son vanished during what was supposed to be a 6-day holiday in Spain, leaving behind their passports, luggage, and a rental car that would later be found abandoned. But 5 years later, 2 men are arrested for their murder, revealing the shocking truth about what really happened to Daniel and Lauryn Poole. March 31st, 2019, was supposed to be the beginning of a perfect getaway. Daniel Poole, a 46-year-old man from Burgess Hill in West Sussex, had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. His 22-year-old son Liam would be joining him for what they planned as a 6-day holiday in the sun-soaked region of Malaga, Spain. Daniel, who went by Danny to his friends and family, had built a strong relationship with his son over the years. Despite some challenges in his past, including previous legal troubles related to drug offenses, Daniel had worked hard to maintain his connection with Liam. The young man was the apple of his father's eye, and those who knew them described their bond as genuine and caring. Liam, at 22, was at that perfect age where he still enjoyed spending time with his father while asserting his independence as a young adult. Friends described him as friendly and outgoing, someone who brought laughter wherever he went. His grandmother, Kathy Catney, considered him one of the brightest lights in her life. The plan was straightforward. Daniel and Liam would fly from London to Malaga on March 31st, spend 6 days exploring the Costa del Sol, and return home refreshed. They had booked accommodations at the Valle Romano Hotel, a golf resort in Estepona, approximately 70 kilometers west of Malaga. The choice of location was interesting, considering that neither Daniel nor Liam was particularly interested in golf. However, the resort offered beautiful views and luxurious accommodations. The fact that it was removed from the busier tourist areas of Malaga provided privacy and relaxation. Daniel's wife Tara later recalled that both men seemed excited about the trip. There was no indication that either was worried about anything, and they appeared to be looking forward to their time away from daily responsibilities. Daniel had been working steadily, and Liam was navigating his early 20s with the usual mix of ambition and uncertainty. On the morning of departure, the family gathered to see Daniel and Liam off. There were the usual last-minute reminders about staying safe, keeping in touch, and bringing back some Spanish sunshine. Both men promised to call regularly and send photos of their adventures. The flight from London to Malaga was uneventful, and they arrived as planned. The Mediterranean climate greeted them warmly, with clear skies and perfect weather. They collected their luggage and made their way through the airport, ready to begin their Spanish adventure. One of their first tasks was securing transportation. They had arranged to rent a vehicle that would give them freedom to explore the region. The rental car they selected was a grey Peugeot 308, with registration number 0254 KTM. This vehicle would later become crucial evidence in one of the most puzzling disappearance cases in recent years. After completing the paperwork, Daniel and Liam drove to the Valle Romano Hotel. The resort was everything they had hoped for, with elegant architecture, well-maintained grounds, and stunning Mediterranean views. They checked into their room, unpacked their belongings, and began to settle in for what they expected to be a relaxing stay. Hotel staff who interacted with them during check-in later described both men as polite and friendly. There was nothing unusual about their behavior, and they seemed like typical tourists eager to enjoy their holiday. They asked about local attractions, dining recommendations, and the best beaches in the area. That evening, Daniel and Liam contacted their family back in England to confirm they had arrived safely. The calls were brief but positive, with both men expressing satisfaction with their accommodations and excitement about the days ahead. They mentioned plans to explore the area, visit local restaurants, and simply enjoy the change of pace from their life in West Sussex. April 1st, 2019 began like any other day for the Poole family back in Burgess Hill. Tara Poole went about her morning routine, expecting to hear from her husband and stepson at some point during the day. The time difference between England and Spain was minimal, making communication easy and convenient. Daniel and Liam had established a pattern of checking in with family members regularly when they traveled. This habit made what happened next all the more alarming. The morning contact came as expected. Daniel called Tara to report that they had slept well and were preparing to explore more of the Estepona area. He mentioned that the weather was beautiful and that they were both looking forward to making the most of their time in Spain. The conversation was cheerful and routine, giving no indication that anything was amiss. Liam also made contact with family members, including his grandmother Kathy Catney, who always looked forward to hearing from her grandson when he was traveling. The conversation was warm and affectionate, with Liam sharing his impressions of the hotel and surrounding area. He seemed happy and relaxed, exactly what his family had hoped for during this vacation. These communications on April 1st would prove to be the last time anyone in the Poole family would hear from Daniel and Liam. At the time, no one had any reason to suspect that these routine check-ins would become precious final memories. The grey Peugeot 308 that Daniel and Liam had rented was seen in various locations around Estepona throughout April 1st. Witnesses later reported seeing the vehicle at different times during the day, suggesting that the men were exploring the area as planned. There was nothing suspicious about these sightings. However, as evening approached on April 1st, the regular communications that the family had come to expect simply stopped. When Tara Poole attempted to reach her husband by phone, her calls went directly to voicemail. Text messages went unanswered. The silence was immediate and complete, which was entirely out of character for both Daniel and Liam. Initially, the family was not overly concerned. They reasoned that the men might have decided to have a night out, perhaps visiting local bars or restaurants where phone reception might be poor. It was also possible that they had gotten caught up in vacation excitement and forgotten to check in regularly. As April 2nd dawned, however, the family's concern began to grow. Still no contact from either Daniel or Liam. Phone calls continued to go unanswered, and text messages remained unread. This behavior was completely unlike both men, who had always been conscientious about staying in touch. Tara Poole's worry intensified as she realized that more than 24 hours had passed since the last communication. She began calling the Volley Romano Hotel directly, hoping to reach them in their room or at least confirm they were still registered guests. Hotel staff confirmed that Daniel and Liam were registered and that their belongings were still in their room, but they had not seen either man recently. The hotel's confirmation that their belongings remained in the room was both reassuring and alarming. It suggested that the men had not simply decided to leave Spain unexpectedly, but it raised questions about where they might be and why they were not returning to their hotel or responding to family communications. By April 3rd, the family's concern had transformed into genuine alarm. 48 hours without any communication was unprecedented and deeply troubling. Tara Poole made the decision to contact Spanish authorities to report her husband and stepson as missing persons. The initial response from Spanish police was measured and professional. They explained that adults could legally disappear for personal reasons, but they agreed to make inquiries at the Valle Romano Hotel. When Spanish police officers arrived at the hotel, they made a discovery that immediately elevated the case from routine missing person inquiry to something far more serious. Daniel and Liam's hotel room remained exactly as they had left it, with all their belongings still in place. Their passports, which would have been essential for travel, were found in the room along with their luggage and personal items. The hotel room told a compelling narrative of men who had clearly intended to return. Clothes were hung in the closet, toiletries were arranged in the bathroom, and personal items were scattered around the room in the casual way that guests typically leave things when they expect to come back. There was no sign of struggle or hurried departure, but equally no indication of planned absence. Most significantly, Spanish police discovered that Daniel and Liam's rental car, the grey Peugeot 308 with registration 0254 KTM, was missing. The car had not been returned to the rental company, and its location was unknown. This discovery transformed the investigation, as it suggested that the men had been using the vehicle at the time of their disappearance. Spanish police began a systematic search for the missing Peugeot. They contacted traffic authorities, reviewed security camera footage from various locations, and issued alerts to law enforcement agencies throughout the region. The search for the vehicle became a priority, as it was likely to provide crucial clues. The investigation expanded to include interviews with hotel staff, other guests, and local businesses where the men might have been seen. Police developed a timeline of the men's activities during their stay in Spain, attempting to identify their last known whereabouts and any individuals they might have encountered. The investigation also revealed that neither Daniel nor Liam had used their credit cards or accessed their bank accounts since April 1st. This financial inactivity was particularly concerning, as travelers typically need to access funds for meals, entertainment, and other expenses. The complete absence of any financial activity suggested that something had prevented them from making normal transactions. The discovery of the abandoned rental car would prove to be the next major development. Several days after the investigation began, Spanish police located the grey Peugeot 308 in a remote area outside Estepona. The vehicle had been abandoned and showed no signs of struggle or accident. The car keys were missing, and there were no personal belongings inside. The location where the car was found was significant. It was in an area that tourists would not typically visit, suggesting that Daniel and Liam had either been driven there by someone else or had gone there for a specific purpose. The remoteness of the location also made it unlikely that casual witnesses would have seen what happened to the men after they left the vehicle. Forensic examination of the abandoned car revealed limited useful evidence. There were no signs of violence or struggle inside the vehicle, and fingerprint analysis showed only the expected prints from Daniel and Liam, along with some that belonged to rental company employees. The car's condition suggested that it had been deliberately abandoned rather than involved in an accident. As days turned into weeks without any sign of Daniel and Liam, the Poole family's anguish deepened. Tara Poole found herself caught between hope and despair, clinging to the possibility that her husband and stepson might still be alive while grappling with the growing likelihood that something terrible had happened. The family's frustration with the pace of the Spanish investigation began to mount. While they understood that Spanish authorities were working diligently, the lack of concrete progress was agonizing. Tara made several trips to Spain, hoping to personally assist in the search and keep pressure on the investigation. During one visit to Estepona, Tara spoke with local media outlets, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. Her emotional appeals were broadcast on Spanish television and reported in local newspapers. "This is completely out of character for them," Tara told reporters. "They never have their phones off and always keep in touch. We are so worried." Lauryn Poole, Daniel's daughter and Liam's sister, became one of the most vocal advocates for keeping the case in the public eye. At 23 years old, she found herself thrust into the role of family spokesperson, organizing appeals and maintaining contact with media outlets. The burden of this responsibility, combined with her grief, took a significant emotional toll. "Not a day goes by that I do not wonder what life would be like with my dad and brother in it," Lauryn would later say. Her words reflected the constant presence of loss and uncertainty that had become part of the family's daily reality. Kathy Catney, Liam's grandmother, was particularly affected by the disappearance. In 2019, she made a decision that would provide insight into the family's growing fears. She agreed to participate in a BBC Inside Out program investigation, traveling to Spain to visit locations where the men had been and to seek answers. During her trip to Estepona, Kathy visited local bars and restaurants, showing photographs of Daniel and Liam to staff and patrons. She carried missing person flyers and asked business owners to display them. Her efforts were largely met with sympathy and cooperation, but she also encountered responses that deepened her concerns. At one bar, when Kathy showed the missing person poster to a bartender, his response was chilling. He said he had seen them and that they were both wrong ones, she recalled. The bartender's characterization suggested that Daniel and Liam had been perceived as troublemakers or involved in questionable activities. Kathy's investigation led her to voice her darkest fears publicly. "I do think Liam has died. I think he has been killed," she told the BBC program. "Where? I hope he is not at the bottom of the sea, because I want the chance of someone giving me him back." The family's belief that the men had been murdered was based on several factors. The complete absence of communication was entirely out of character. The abandoned rental car suggested they had been prevented from continuing normal activities. Most significantly, the undisturbed hotel room indicated they had expected to return, ruling out voluntary disappearance. Several months after Daniel and Liam's disappearance, the Poole family received a communication that would add another layer of mystery and terror to their overwhelming situation. The contact came in the form of a phone message, and its origin was as shocking as its content. The message appeared to come from Morocco, a country across the Mediterranean Sea from Spain. The caller claimed to be holding Daniel and Liam and demanded a ransom payment of £100,000 for their safe return. The demand was specific and urgent, suggesting that the men's lives depended on the family's ability to raise the money quickly. Despite the financial enormity of the demand, the Poole family's response was immediate and decisive. Within hours of receiving the ransom demand, they had mobilized their resources and managed to raise the full £100,000. The speed with which they assembled this amount demonstrated both their desperation and their belief that the demand might be genuine. The family contacted relatives, friends, and business associates, explaining the situation and asking for help. The response was overwhelming, with people contributing whatever they could to help bring Daniel and Liam home safely. The outpouring of support showed how much the two men were loved by their community. However, after the family had raised the ransom money and prepared to make the payment, something unexpected happened. The promised follow-up contact from the alleged kidnappers never came. Despite having successfully assembled the demanded funds, the family heard nothing more from the person or people who had made the initial demand. The silence that followed the ransom demand was even more disturbing than the original message. If Daniel and Liam were indeed being held by kidnappers, why would the criminals not follow through on their demand after the family had demonstrated their ability to pay? The lack of further communication suggested that something had gone wrong with the alleged kidnapping scenario. The family was left in an even more agonizing state of uncertainty. They had £100,000 ready to pay for Daniel and Liam's release, but no one to pay it to. The absence of follow-up contact raised troubling questions about whether the men were still alive and whether the ransom demand had been genuine. Law enforcement agencies analyzed the ransom demand and its implications. The fact that the message had apparently originated from Morocco was significant, as it suggested that Daniel and Liam might have been taken across international borders. However, the lack of follow-up contact made it difficult to determine whether the demand was genuine or an opportunistic attempt to exploit the family's desperation. The geographic connection to Morocco also raised questions about the nature of Daniel and Liam's disappearance. Morocco was known to have connections to various criminal networks, including those involved in drug trafficking. Given Daniel's past legal troubles related to drug offenses, investigators had to consider whether the men had become involved in criminal activities. The investigation into the ransom demand revealed few concrete leads. Tracing the origin of the phone message proved difficult, and there was no physical evidence to support the claim that Daniel and Liam were being held in Morocco. The lack of proof of life made the authenticity of the demand questionable. As 2019 progressed into 2020, the investigation into Daniel and Lauryn Poole's disappearance faced increasing challenges. Spanish authorities had exhausted many of their initial leads, and the case appeared to be reaching a frustrating stalemate. The lack of physical evidence, reliable witnesses, and concrete clues made it difficult to determine what had happened. Spanish police had conducted extensive searches of the area around Estepona, interviewed numerous people, reviewed security camera footage, and followed up on various tips and leads. However, despite their efforts, they had not been able to establish a clear timeline of events or identify any suspects. The investigation also faced challenges related to the international nature of the case. While Daniel and Liam had disappeared in Spain, they were British nationals, and their families were based in England. This meant that effective investigation required coordination between Spanish and British law enforcement agencies, which could be complicated and time-consuming. In England, Sussex Police had been monitoring the Spanish investigation and providing assistance where possible. However, as British law enforcement officers, they had limited authority to conduct direct investigations in Spain. They could share information, provide resources, and offer expertise, but they could not take the lead while it remained under Spanish jurisdiction. The family's frustration with the pace of the investigation continued to grow. They understood that Spanish authorities were working diligently, but the lack of progress was agonizing for people desperate for answers. The family began to explore legal options for increasing pressure on the investigation. As 2020 arrived, the first anniversary of Daniel and Liam's disappearance approached. The family organized memorial events and renewed their appeals for information, hoping that the anniversary might prompt someone with knowledge to come forward. However, the anniversary passed without any significant breakthroughs. The family's experience highlighted the unique challenges faced by people dealing with missing loved ones. Unlike families dealing with confirmed deaths, they could not properly grieve or find closure. They were caught in a state of suspended emotion, unable to move forward but also unable to give up hope. As 2021 arrived, the Spanish investigation appeared to be at a standstill. The authorities had followed up on all available leads and had exhausted their immediate options for progressing the case. Without new evidence or witnesses, it was difficult to determine what additional steps could be taken. In England, Sussex Police had been working behind the scenes to prepare for the possibility of taking over the investigation from Spanish authorities. This process, known as seeking primacy, would allow British law enforcement to take the lead in the case while working in cooperation with Spanish authorities. In 2022, a significant development occurred that would change the trajectory of the investigation. Sussex Police made the formal decision to treat Daniel and Liam's disappearance as a murder investigation, officially acknowledging what the family had long suspected, that the men had been killed. The decision to reclassify the case as a homicide was based on several factors. The complete absence of any contact from the men for more than 3 years was considered highly significant. The The circumstances of their disappearance, including the abandoned rental car and untouched hotel room, suggested they had been prevented from continuing their normal activities by force or coercion. Detective Chief Inspector Simon Dunn, who would lead the Sussex Police investigation, made it clear that the force was committed to seeking justice for Daniel and Liam. "We believe there are people in the United Kingdom who may hold vital information about their disappearance," he stated. This comment suggested that the investigation would focus significantly on connections between the case and individuals or activities in Britain. The Sussex Police investigation, designated as Operation Pheasant, represented a major escalation in efforts to solve the case. Unlike the Spanish investigation, which had been constrained by limited resources and competing priorities, Operation Pheasant would be a dedicated, well-resourced effort focused solely on determining what had happened to Daniel and Liam. The decision to treat the case as a murder investigation also had important implications for the family. While it confirmed their worst fears about Daniel and Liam's fate, it also provided validation for their long-held belief that the men had been killed. More importantly, it demonstrated that law enforcement was taking the case seriously and was committed to seeking justice. Detective Chief Inspector Dunn's statement about people in the United Kingdom holding vital information was particularly significant. It suggested that the investigation had identified potential connections between the case and individuals or activities in Britain. This focus on domestic connections represented a new direction for the investigation. Sussex Police began the complex process of seeking primacy over the investigation from Spanish authorities. This legal and diplomatic process would allow British law enforcement to take the lead while continuing to work cooperatively with Spanish police. The transition would ensure that the investigation could proceed with maximum effectiveness and resources. The family welcomed Sussex Police's increased involvement. They felt that British law enforcement's understanding of Daniel and Liam's backgrounds and connections would provide advantages that had not been available to Spanish authorities. They also appreciated the commitment of resources that Operation Pheasant represented. As 2022 progressed, Sussex Police worked to build their understanding of the case and develop new investigative strategies. They reviewed all available evidence from the Spanish investigation, conducted additional interviews with family members and associates, and began exploring new leads that had not been fully pursued. The investigation's focus on United Kingdom connections led to increased scrutiny of Daniel's past associates and activities. Police began examining his previous legal troubles in detail, looking for connections that might have led to his and Liam's disappearance. This process was complex and time-consuming, but it represented the most promising avenue for advancing the case. November 2024 marked a significant escalation in the Daniel and Lauryn Poole investigation. Sussex Police, now in full control of Operation Pheasant, made a decision that would demonstrate their commitment to solving the case. They offered a £10,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and charge of anyone responsible for the men's disappearance. The reward offer was accompanied by a renewed public appeal for information. Detective Chief Inspector Simon Dunn made it clear that the investigation remained active and that police believed there were people with crucial information who had not yet come forward. "We understand there may be some who have felt unable to come forward before now, but it is not too late to do the right thing," he stated. The timing of the reward offer was strategic. It came nearly 6 years after Daniel and Liam's disappearance, a period during which relationships might have changed, loyalties might have shifted, and people who had previously been unwilling to speak might now be ready to provide information. The family's response to the reward offer was one of cautious optimism. Lauryn Poole, speaking on behalf of the family, emphasized the ongoing impact of her father and brother's disappearance. "Not a day goes by that I do not wonder what life would be like with my dad and brother in it," she said. Lauryn's statement also revealed the psychological toll that the uncertainty had taken on the family. "Every day I think about what truly happened and what their last moments might have been like," she said. These thoughts often kept her awake at night, demonstrating the constant presence of grief and uncertainty in the family's daily lives. The reward offer generated significant media attention, both in the United Kingdom and in Spain. News outlets reported on the case and the family's ongoing quest for justice, helping to raise public awareness and potentially reaching individuals who might have relevant information. The £10,000 reward was substantial enough to be taken seriously by potential informants. It represented a significant sum that might motivate someone to overcome their reluctance to get involved in the case. The reward was structured to require that information lead to an arrest and charge, ensuring that only genuinely useful information would be rewarded. Then, in December 2024, The breakthrough that the family and investigators had been hoping for finally came. Sussex Police announced that 2 men had been arrested in connection with the suspected murders of Daniel and Lauryn Poole. The arrests represented the most significant development in the case since the men's disappearance nearly 6 years earlier. The 2 arrested men were described as British nationals, one in his 30s from West Sussex and another in his 40s from the Merseyside area. The geographic distribution of the arrests confirmed the investigation's focus on United Kingdom connections and suggested that the case involved a network of individuals across different regions of Britain. The arrests were the result of months of careful investigation and evidence gathering. Sussex Police had worked methodically to build their case, identifying suspects and gathering the evidence needed to support arrests. The timing of the arrests, coming just weeks after the reward offer, suggested that the renewed public appeal might have provided crucial information. The fact that both arrested men were British nationals was significant. It confirmed that Daniel and Liam's disappearance was not simply a case of tourists falling victim to random crime in Spain. Instead, it appeared to involve a premeditated plan carried out by people who knew the men or had specific reasons for targeting them. Following their arrests, both men were questioned by Sussex Police and then released pending further inquiries. This procedure was standard for complex investigations, allowing police to continue gathering evidence while maintaining the ability to rearrest the suspects if additional evidence became available. As the investigation into Daniel and Lauryn Poole's disappearance continued following the December 2024 arrests, the family found themselves in a familiar position, hopeful for progress but cautious about expecting immediate resolution. The arrests had provided the most significant breakthrough in the case since the men's disappearance, but they also marked the beginning of what would likely be a lengthy legal process. The complexity of the case meant that Sussex Police would need to build comprehensive cases against any suspects before charges could be brought. This process would involve reviewing all available evidence, conducting additional interviews, and potentially uncovering new information that could strengthen the prosecution's position. Detective Chief Inspector Simon Dunn's leadership of Operation Pheasant had been crucial to the investigation's success. His decision to focus on United Kingdom connections had proven to be correct, and his team's methodical approach to building the case had resulted in the arrests. The investigation continued under his direction, with the goal of bringing charges against those responsible for Daniel and Liam's deaths. The family's role in the investigation had been essential from the beginning. Their advocacy efforts had kept the case in the public eye. Their cooperation with police had provided crucial background information, and their determination had helped ensure that the investigation remained a priority. Their continued support would be important as the case moved through the legal system. Lauryn Poole's journey from a young woman dealing with the disappearance of her father and brother to a determined advocate for justice had been remarkable. Her willingness to speak publicly about the case and to keep pressure on authorities had been instrumental in maintaining momentum for the investigation. The case had demonstrated the importance of international cooperation in modern law enforcement. The ability of Sussex Police to work with Spanish authorities and to pursue leads across national boundaries had been essential to the investigation's progress. This cooperation would likely continue as the legal process moved forward. The arrests had provided some measure of closure for the family, even as many questions remained unanswered. While they still did not know the specific details of what had happened to Daniel and Liam, they now had official confirmation that the men had been murdered and that suspects had been identified. The investigation had also highlighted the challenges faced by families dealing with missing loved ones. The years of uncertainty, the emotional toll of not knowing what had happened, and the need to maintain hope while preparing for the worst had all been part of the family's experience. The case had shown the importance of persistent, well-resourced investigation efforts. Sussex Police's commitment to Operation Pheasant had been crucial to the progress of the case. The decision to seek primacy over the investigation and to dedicate significant resources to it had been validated by the arrests and ongoing progress. As the investigation continued, the family remained committed to supporting the legal process and ensuring that justice would be served. They understood that the path ahead would be challenging and that there would likely be setbacks and disappointments. However, they also knew that they had come further than they had ever imagined possible. The investigation team's work was far from over. They would continue to build their cases against the arrested suspects, investigate whether additional people might have been involved, and seek answers to the many questions that remained about what had happened to Daniel and Liam. The family's message to anyone who might still have information about the case remained clear. It was not too late to come forward. The investigation was ongoing, and any additional information could be crucial to ensuring that justice was served. The family's determination to find answers about what had happened to Daniel and Liam remained as strong as ever. As the case moved forward, the family could take some comfort in knowing that their loved ones had not been forgotten. The investigation had demonstrated that Daniel and Liam's lives mattered, that their disappearance had been taken seriously, and that determined efforts were being made to seek justice on their behalf. If you found this case as gripping as we did, make sure to subscribe to Criminal Mind Cortex for more incredible true crime investigations that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice and determination. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest deep examinations into the most compelling cases from around the world. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light and honoring the memories of those who have been lost.